When I found out my father had secretly sold the lakeside cabin my grandfather left me and transferred all the money to my sister, I thought there had been some kind of administrative error. I actually laughed it off. 2 days later, when I was standing in front of the property watching the new owners move in their furniture, the reality hit me like a physical blow. My father didn't just betray my trust. He had stolen my future and my connection to the grandfather who had raised me. What happened next would tear our family apart forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in the shadow of the Cascade Mountains, my grandfather's lakeside cabin was my only real home. My parents divorced when I was 7, and my father, Charles, quickly remarried and started a new family with my stepmother, Diane. They had my half-sister, Rebecca, when I was 9, and it became clear early on that my presence was more of an obligation than a joy in their household. I spent weekends and holidays at my father's house, but I always felt like an outsider, watching as Rebecca received the attention and affection I desperately craved. My mom tried her best, but her job as a traveling pharmaceutical rep meant she was rarely home. "It's just for a few years, Madeline," she would promise. "Once I get promoted, things will be different." But that promotion never seemed to come, and I found myself spending more and more time with my grandfather, Elliot. Grandpa Elliot's cabin sat on the shores of Lake Meridian, a crystal-clear glacial lake surrounded by towering pines and rugged mountains. The cabin itself wasn't anything fancy, just 3 bedrooms, a large stone fireplace, and a wraparound porch that offered breathtaking views of the water. But to me, it was paradise. Grandpa taught me how to fish, how to identify edible plants. In the forest, how to navigate using just the stars. We would spend hours by the fireplace as he told me stories about his time as a forest ranger, about the bears he'd encountered, and the lost hikers he'd rescued. "This place has spirit, Maddie," he would say, his weathered hand gesturing to the surrounding wilderness. "It's alive in a way those cities never will be. Remember that." When I turned 15, my father stopped pretending he wanted me around. The weekend visits became monthly, then sporadic, then practically non-existent. By then, Rebecca was 6, the apple of his eye, and I was just a reminder of a failed marriage. But I didn't care much by that point. I had found my real home at the cabin, and Grandpa Elliot had become more of a father to me than Charles ever was. After high school, I went to state college on a partial scholarship, working part-time to cover the rest. I came home every chance I got, not to my mother's empty apartment or my father's house where I didn't belong, but to the cabin, to Grandpa. He was getting older, moving a little slower, but his mind was as sharp as ever. We would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of orange and purple, talking about my classes, my future plans, his old adventures. "You know, Maddie," he told me during one of these sunset talks, "this place will be yours someday." I've made sure of it. I tried to shush him. I didn't want to talk about a future without him in it, but he insisted. "No, listen to me. Your father thinks this property should go to him. He's been dropping hints for years, but I've seen how he treats you, how he favors Rebecca. This cabin, this land, it's meant for someone who loves it, who understands it." "That's you, dear." I was touched but uncomfortable with the conversation. "Grandpa, you're going to outlive all of us. We don't need to talk about this." He just chuckled and took another sip of his coffee. "Just remember what I said." 3 years later, during my final semester of college, I got the call that Grandpa Elliot had suffered a massive stroke. I rushed to the hospital, but he never regained consciousness. He died 2 days later, with me holding his hand, telling him about the family of eagles I'd spotted near the cabin the previous weekend. The funeral was small. Grandpa hadn't been one for large gatherings. My father showed up with Diane and Rebecca, looking appropriately somber but checking his watch every few minutes. My mother flew in from a conference in Phoenix, A few of Grandpa's old ranger colleagues were there, telling stories about his bravery and kindness. I stood apart from everyone, feeling a hollowness that I wasn't sure would ever go away. 2 weeks after the funeral, we all gathered at the office of Grandpa's attorney, Mr. Harmon, for the reading of the will. Mr. Harmon was an older man with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He had been Grandpa's friend for decades. Elliot was very specific about his wishes, Mr. Harmon said, opening a leather folder. I'll summarize the main points. My father shifted impatiently in his seat. Let's not drag this out. Mr. Harmon gave my father a cool look before continuing. The majority of Elliot's savings will be divided equally between his son Charles and his granddaughter Madeline. My father nodded as if this was expected. His collection of books and maps will go to the Ranger Station Museum. His tools and equipment will go to his colleague, Jim Reeves. More nods all around. And the lakeside property, including the cabin and all surrounding land, is bequeathed solely to his granddaughter, Madeline Mitchell. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then my father's face darkened. What did you say? He demanded. Mr. Harmon repeated himself calmly. The lakeside property goes to Madeline. Elliot was very clear about this. My father turned to me, his expression a mix of shock and anger. He can't do that. That property has been in our family for generations. It should go to me, then to my children. Child, I corrected quietly. I'm your child too. My father waved dismissively. You know what I mean. Rebecca is the future of this family. That property is worth a fortune now with all the development around the lake. He can't just cut out his own son. Mr. Harmon closed his folder with finality. I assure you, Charles, everything is in order. Elliot made this decision with full knowledge and sound mind. The property belongs to Madeline now. I sat there, stunned. I knew Grandpa had mentioned leaving me the cabin, but I hadn't taken it seriously. Now it was mine. The only place that had ever felt like home. My father stormed out of the office without another word, Diane and Rebecca trailing behind him. My mother squeezed my shoulder before leaving as well. I stayed behind to speak with Mr. Harmon. I didn't expect this, I admitted. Mr. Harmon smiled sadly. Your grandfather knew exactly what he was doing, Madeline. He was worried about your father trying to contest the will, so he made everything airtight. The property is yours, free and clear. There are no mortgages, no liens, just yearly property taxes, which should be manageable. He wanted you to have a place of your own, a place where you felt you belonged. I nodded, tears threatening. Thank you. One more thing, Mr. Harmon added. Elliot left this for you. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a letter written in my grandfather's shaky handwriting. Madeline, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you now own the cabin. Don't feel sad. I've lived a good, long life, and some of my happiest memories were the times we spent together at the lake. This place is special, not just because of the land or the views, but because of what it represents. It's a place where you can be yourself, where the noise of the world fades away and you can hear your own thoughts. I've watched you grow into a thoughtful, kind young woman, despite the challenges you faced. I'm proud of you, my dear. Your father may be upset about my decision, but in time, he'll understand, or maybe he won't. Either way, this was my choice to make, and I made it with clear eyes and a full heart. Take care of this place, Maddie. It's yours now. Make new memories here. Find peace here. And whenever you watch the sunset from the porch, know that a part of me is sitting there beside you. All my love. Grandpa, I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. My vision blurred, with tears. The weeks after the reading of the will were quiet. I finished my final semester, graduated with my degree in environmental science, and started applying for jobs with conservation organizations. My father didn't reach out, which wasn't surprising. I spent weekends at the cabin, cleaning it up, making small repairs, thinking about Grandpa. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I found a job with a wildlife protection agency based about an hour from the lake. Not a coincidence, as I had focused my job search in that area. The pay wasn't great, but it was work I cared about, and I could live at the cabin and avoid paying rent. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had a clear path forward. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday morning in early June, about 3 months after Grandpa's passing. I was at my desk reviewing data on local wolf populations when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello? Is this Madeline Mitchell?" A woman's voice asked. "Yes, that's me." "Hi, Miss Mitchell. This is Trisha Lawson from Evergreen Realty. I'm just calling to confirm that all the paperwork has been processed for the sale of your property on Lake Meridian. The new owners are planning to take possession this weekend." I felt a cold wave wash over me. "I'm sorry. There must be some mistake. I haven't sold my property." There was a pause on the other end. I have the sale agreement right here, signed. By Charles Mitchell, acting as your authorized agent. The sale closed last week. My mind raced. Charles Mitchell is my father. He is absolutely not authorized to sell that property. The deed is in my name. Another pause. "Ma'am, I have a power of attorney document here authorizing him to act on your behalf. It has your signature on it." "That's impossible," I said, my voice rising. "I never signed anything like that." "I see." Her voice had become more cautious. "Ms. Mitchell, I think you should contact your attorney. This is unusual." I hung up and immediately called Mr. Harmon, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. "Madeline, slow down," he said, after I frantically explained the situation. "This can't be legal. Come to my office right away and we'll sort this out." I drove to his office in a daze, trying to figure out how this could have happened. My father and I hadn't spoken in months. I had never signed a power of attorney. How could he possibly have sold my property? Mr. Harmon was waiting for me, his expression grave. "I've made some calls," he said once I was seated. "The sale appears to be legitimate on paper. Your father presented a power of attorney that gave him the right to sell the property on your behalf. The document looks authentic, with your signature, properly notarized." "But I never signed anything," I insisted. "I believe you," Mr. Harmon said quietly. "Which means the signature was forged. The sale price was $580,000. The money was transferred to an account in your name, but it appears the funds were immediately withdrawn and transferred elsewhere." I felt sick. "Can we stop this? Can we void the sale?" "We can try," Mr. Harmon said. "But the new owners are innocent purchasers. They paid fair market value and had no reason to suspect anything was amiss. It's complicated." "I need to talk to my father," I said, standing up. Mr. Harmon looked concerned. "Madeline, that might not be the best idea right now. If he did forge your signature, that's a serious crime. We should let the legal process." But I was already heading for the door. "I'll call you later." I drove straight to my father's house, a modern 2-story in an upscale neighborhood about 40 minutes from the lake. I hadn't been there in years, but nothing much had changed. The perfectly maintained lawn, the luxury cars in the driveway, the overall sense of calculated prosperity. I pounded on the front door until my father opened it, looking annoyed. When he saw me, his expression changed to something harder to read. Caution? Maybe. Or defiance. "Madeline," he said flatly. "This is unexpected." "You sold my cabin," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "You forged my signature and sold the only thing in this world that meant anything to me." He sighed and glanced around, as if checking whether any neighbors were witnessing this scene. "Come inside. We shouldn't do this on the porch." I followed him into the living room, where Rebecca was lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up, surprised to see me. "Hey, Maddie." she said cautiously. At 16, she was at that awkward stage between child and adult, tall and gangly with braces and uncertain eyes. Despite everything, I didn't blame her for our father's favoritism. It wasn't her fault. "Rebecca, go to your room," my father said. She looked between us, sensing the tension. "What's going on?" "Now, Rebecca," he said more firmly. Once she had gone upstairs, my father turned to me. "Sit down." "I'll stand." "Explain why you committed fraud and sold my property." He crossed his arms. "It wasn't fraud. I did what needed to be done for this family." "It wasn't your property to sell?" I shouted. "Lower your voice," he snapped. "Your grandfather made a mistake. That property should have stayed in the direct family line. Rebecca needed the money for her future." I stared at him in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" "College isn't cheap, Madeline. Rebecca is gifted. She's been accepted to a special pre-college program at Juilliard for next year. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but the tuition is astronomical. The money from the sale is going to secure her future." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So you stole my inheritance to pay for Rebecca's music lessons? Are you out of your mind?" "It's not music lessons," he said, his voice cold. "It's her career, her life. You have your degree, your job, you're fine. Rebecca needs this opportunity. And you didn't think to, talk to me about it? Maybe see if I'd be willing to help my sister? Instead, you committed a crime." "It's done, Madeline," he said with finality. "The property is sold. The money has been transferred to a trust for Rebecca's education. You can be angry if you want, but nothing will change." I stood there, trembling with fury and disbelief. "You forged my signature. That's fraud. You're going to jail for this." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "No judge is going to send a father to jail for helping his daughter. This is a family matter." "We'll see about that," I said, turning to leave. "This isn't over, not by a long shot." As I reached the door, my father called after me. "Madeline, be reasonable. What's done is done. Don't throw away what's left of this family over a piece of property." I turned back to him, a strange calm suddenly replacing my anger. That piece of property was my home. The only real home I ever had. "And you?" I looked him directly in the eyes. "You haven't been family to me since I was 7 years old. This changes nothing between us because there was nothing left to change." I walked out, got in my car, and called Mr. Harmon. "I want to press charges," I said without preamble. My father admitted to everything. He sold the property to pay for my sister's music school. He forged my signature. He stole over $500,000 from me. I want him prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Mr. Harmon said, "Come back to my office, Madeline. We have work to do." As I drove away from my father's house, I realized that something fundamental had shifted inside me. The pain of betrayal was still there, sharp and raw, but beneath it was something else, a steely determination. My father thought he could take what was mine, what Grandpa had wanted me to have, and there would be no consequences. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I spent that night in a cheap motel near the lake, unable to face going back to my apartment. I kept replaying my father's words in my head. Rebecca needed the money for her future. As if my future meant nothing. As if Grandpa Elliot's wishes meant nothing. I barely slept, my mind racing with questions and plans. The next morning, I met with Mr. Harmon and officially hired him to represent me. Despite his age, his eyes burned with indignation when I recounted my conversation with my father. "This is more than just a civil matter, Madeline," he said, tapping his pen against his legal pad. "What your father did constitutes criminal fraud, identity theft, and conversion of property. But before we involve the police, we need to gather evidence and protect what we can. Mr. Harmon immediately filed an emergency injunction to freeze any remaining funds from the sale. If the money hasn't all been transferred to this music school trust yet, we might be able to recover some of it, he explained. And we need to get a copy of this supposed power of attorney document your father used. While Mr. Harmon worked on the legal side, I took a personal day from work and drove to the Evergreen Realty office. The receptionist recognized me from our phone call and looked uncomfortable as she called for Tricia Lawson. A few minutes later, a professional-looking woman in her 40s emerged, her expression guarded. "Ms. Mitchell," she said carefully, "I understand there's some confusion about the sale of your property." "There's no confusion," I replied evenly. "My father committed fraud. I need copies of all the documents he presented to you, especially the power of attorney. I also need the contact information for the buyers." She hesitated. "I'm not sure I can—" "My attorney is filing an injunction today," I cut in. "You can give me the documents voluntarily now, or we can subpoena them later. Either way, your company is going to be involved in this case. How involved depends on your cooperation today." Tricia's professional demeanor slipped for a moment, revealing genuine concern. "Ms. Mitchell, I assure you that Evergreen followed all standard protocols. The power of attorney appeared legitimate, it was properly notarized, and— May I see it?" She nodded reluctantly and disappeared into a back office. When she returned, she was carrying a manila folder. "These are copies of all the documents related to the sale," she said, handing me the folder. "The originals are already with the county recorder's office." I opened the folder right there and found the power of attorney document on top. My stomach dropped as I saw my signature at the bottom, or rather, what was supposed to be my signature. It was close enough that someone who didn't know my handwriting well might be fooled, but it wasn't mine. The curves were too rounded, the pressure too even. "This is forged," I said, looking up at Tricia. "I never signed this." To her credit, she looked genuinely distressed. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm very sorry, but this document was notarized by a licensed notary public. We had no reason to question its authenticity." I flipped to the notary section and saw the stamp and signature of someone named Patricia Walters. The name meant nothing to me. "Who are the buyers?" I asked. Tricia hesitated again, then sighed. "The Blackwell family. They're moving here from Seattle. They have 2 young children and fell in love with the property immediately." "Ms. Mitchell, they've already begun moving in. They're innocent in all this." I closed the folder, suddenly feeling the weight of how complicated this would be. Innocent buyers who had no idea they'd purchased a stolen property. A sister who needed the money for her education. A father who had committed a crime, but perhaps thought he was doing the right thing for his family. Just not for me. "Thank you for these," I said, holding up the folder. "I hope your company has good lawyers." Back at Mr. Harmon's office, we examined the documents together. "The forgery is decent but not professional," he mused, comparing the signature to some documents I had actually signed. "And this notary, Patricia Walters, we need to track her down." Mr. Harmon called a private investigator he worked with regularly, a former police detective named Mike Rollins. While we waited for him to arrive, Mr. Harmon shared some preliminary news. "I managed to get a temporary freeze on the account where the money was initially deposited," he said. "Unfortunately, most of it, about $500,000, has already been transferred elsewhere. We're trying to trace it, but your father moved quickly." Mike Rollins arrived an hour later, a burly man with a salt-and-pepper beard and shrewd eyes. I explained the situation while he listened without interruption, occasionally jotting notes. "The notary is our first priority," Mike said after I finished. "If she knowingly participated in the fraud, that strengthens our case considerably." "I'll find her." I handed him the power of attorney document. "How long will it take?" He shrugged. "Depends. If she's a legitimate notary who got duped somehow, probably not long. If she's operating under a fake identity, or working some kind of scam with your father. It could be more complicated. Give me a couple of days. Those couple of days were among the longest of my life. I couldn't concentrate at work, couldn't sleep, couldn't even bring myself to drive by the lake and see strangers living in Grandpa's cabin. I called my mother, who was currently in Boston for work, and told her what had happened. I never thought Charles would go this far, she said, sounding genuinely shocked. I mean, I know he's always favored Rebecca, but this is criminal. Maddie? Will you testify if it comes to that? I asked. About Dad's character? How he's treated me over the years? There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, she said finally. I'm sure there's a way to resolve this without destroying what's left of your relationship with your father. I laughed bitterly. There is no relationship to destroy, Mom. There hasn't been for years. You just haven't been around enough to notice. The truth of those words hung in the air between us, and I immediately regretted saying them. My mother had her flaws, but her constant traveling had been to provide for us after the divorce. It wasn't fair to throw that in her face. I'm sorry, I said before she could respond. That was out of line. No, she said quietly. You're right. I haven't been there for you like I should have been. Maybe if I had been more present, none of this would have happened. She took a deep breath. I'll testify if you need me to. I promise. 2 days later, Mike Rollins called with news. I found your notary, he said without preamble. Patricia Walters, age 52, works at a UPS store in Tacoma that offers notary services. She remembers notarizing a document for a young woman about 3 months ago. A young woman? I repeated, confused. Not my father? No. According to her description, she was in her early 20s, dark hair, average height. She says she presented ID that matched the name on the document, your name, and that she had all the necessary documentation. She notarized it in good faith. My mind raced. Who would have helped my father with this scheme? Who could have impersonated me? And then it hit me. My cousin Tara, my father's niece. We were similar in build and coloring. We'd never been close, but she'd always been my father's favorite niece, working summers at my father's construction company during college. I think I know who it was, I told Mike. My cousin Tara. She's the right age, looks a bit like me, and she's always been close to my dad. Do you have a photo? I found an old family reunion picture on my phone and sent it to Mike. 20 minutes later, he called back. I showed Ms. Walters the photo. She identified your cousin immediately as the person who came in for the notarization. She's pretty upset. Says she never would have notarized it if she'd known it was fraudulent. She's willing to provide a statement. The pieces were falling into place. My father had convinced Tara to impersonate me to get the document notarized, then used it to sell the property. It wasn't just a spontaneous bad decision. It was a calculated plan. The next day, armed with the notary statement and evidence of the forged signature, Mr. Harmon and I went to the police station to file a formal complaint. The detective assigned. To our case, a serious woman named Detective Mercer listened carefully as we laid out the evidence. This is a clear case of fraud, she said, reviewing the documents. We'll need to interview this notary, your cousin, and of course, your father. It's going to take some time to build the case, but based on what you've shown me, there are grounds for multiple charges here. What about the property itself? I asked. The new owners have already moved in. Detective Mercer frowned. That's complicated. If they purchased it in good faith, without knowledge of the fraud, they have certain legal protections. This may end up being more about financial restitution than recovering the actual property. I nodded, having already suspected as much. The thought of never going back to Grandpa's cabin sent a fresh wave of grief through me, but I pushed it aside, one battle at a time. Later that afternoon, I received a call from an unexpected source, my stepmother, Diane. Madeline, she said, her voice wavering slightly. I just got home and Charles told me the police had been here. He's being charged with fraud over the lake property. I was surprised she didn't already know. He forged my signature and sold my inheritance without my knowledge or consent. So yes, he's being charged with fraud, identity theft, and conversion of property. There was a long silence. I didn't know, she finally said. About the forgery, I mean. He told me you had agreed to sell the property to help with Rebecca's tuition. And you believed that? I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. After everything. I wanted to believe it, she admitted. I wanted to think you'd finally, I don't know, found some common ground with your father. She paused. Madeline, is there any way we can resolve this without criminal charges? For Rebecca's sake? Her words hit me like a slap. Even now it was all about Rebecca, not about the wrong that had been done to me, not about my grandfather's wishes being violated, but about protecting Rebecca from the consequences of our father's actions. The time for negotiations was before he committed a crime, I said coldly. He stole from me, Diane. $500,000 and the only place I've ever really called home. There's no resolving that with a handshake and an apology. He could lose his contractor's license over this, she said, an edge of desperation in her voice. Our entire livelihood. He should have thought of that before he decided to commit fraud, I cut in. I'm sorry, Diane, but this is happening. The police are also looking into Tara's involvement. Did you know about that too? That Dad convinced my cousin to impersonate me at a notary office? Her shocked silence was answer enough. That's what I thought, I said. Maybe instead of trying to make this go away, you should be asking yourself what kind of man you've been, protecting all these years. I hung up, my hands shaking. I hadn't expected to feel so angry talking to Diane, but hearing her immediate concern for my father and Rebecca, with not a word about the wrong done to me, had triggered years of resentment. I thought I'd moved past. My phone rang again almost immediately. I assumed it was Diane calling back, but the screen showed Rebecca's name instead. I hesitated, then answered. Maddie? Her voice sounded small, younger than her 16 years. Is Dad going to jail? I closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted. I don't. No, Rebecca. That's not up to me. It's up to the prosecutor and eventually a judge or jury. But you're the one pressing charges, she said, a hint of accusation creeping into her voice. Yes, because he committed a serious crime. He stole from me. He was trying to help me, she burst out. I got into Juilliard's pre-college program. Do you know how big a deal that is? How much it costs? So that makes it okay to steal from me? I asked quietly. To forge my signature? To take the home our grandfather wanted me to have? He's your father, she said, as if that explained everything. And I'm your sister, I countered. Did either of you think about asking me for help? About explaining the situation and seeing if we could work something out? Did Dad even consider taking out a loan or a second mortgage or any legal option before deciding to steal from me? Rebecca was silent for a moment. I didn't know how he got the money, she finally said. He just told me he'd figured it out, that I shouldn't worry. I was so excited about getting in. I didn't question it. I believed her. Despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to think Rebecca had been complicit in the fraud. She was just a kid caught in our father's web of manipulation. I'm sorry, Rebecca, I said more gently. I know this isn't your fault. But what Dad did was wrong, and there have to be consequences. So I lose my spot at Juilliard, and Dad goes to jail, and you get your revenge. Great. The bitterness in her voice was palpable. This isn't about revenge, I said, feeling my patience slipping. And there might be other ways for you to afford Juilliard. Scholarships? Student loans. Save it, she interrupted. You've made your choice. I hope it makes you happy. Then she hung up, I set my phone down and put my head in my hands. Why did I feel guilty when I was the victim here? Why was I the one being made to feel like the bad guy for simply seeking justice? The next day, while I was at work trying to focus on a report about local salmon populations, I got a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. It's Tara. Meet me at Cascade Coffee at 5. My cousin Tara. The person who had impersonated me at the notary office, enabling the entire fraud. I texted back, "Why should I?" Her response came quickly, "Because I have information you need about the money." I showed up at the coffee shop at exactly 5 p.m., tense and ready for a confrontation. Tara was already there, looking nervous, a baseball cap pulled low over her eyes. At 23, she was a few years younger than me, with the same dark hair and similar build that had allowed her to pass as me at the notary office. "You've got a lot of nerve," I said as I sat down across from her. She glanced around anxiously. "I know you're pissed, and you have every right to be, but you need to hear me out." "Why did you do it?" I asked. "Why would you help him steal from me?" Tara ran a hand over her face. "He told me you had agreed to sell the property but couldn't. Be there to sign the papers yourself. Said you were on some work trip in Oregon and asked if I could help out. He had all the documents ready, your ID. It seemed legit." "You didn't think to call me and confirm?" I asked incredulously. "I should have," she admitted. "But Uncle Charles has always been good to me. Gave me summer jobs, helped me with college, tuition. I had no reason to doubt him." She leaned forward. "But that's not why I wanted to meet. There's something you should know about the money." I raised an eyebrow. "What about it?" "Not all of it went to Rebecca's music school thing. Uncle Charles took some of it, a lot of it actually, and invested it in a land development deal. A big one, out by the state park. He's been trying to get in on it for years. This was unexpected." "How do you know this?" "I work for him, remember? I saw the paperwork. He transferred $250,000 to some trust for Rebecca, but the other $250,000 went to East Ridge Development Partners." I felt a fresh wave of anger. My father hadn't just stolen from me to help Rebecca. He'd used half the money for his own business interests. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked suspiciously. Tara fidgeted with her coffee cup. "Because the cops interviewed me yesterday. I told them everything. About the notary. About Uncle Charles asking me to pretend to be you. I'm in serious trouble. Maddie, I could face charges too." She looked up at me, her expression desperate. "I'm hoping if I cooperate, if I help you recover some of the money, maybe you could put in a good word for me with the prosecutor." I studied my cousin's face. She seemed genuinely afraid, and while I was still angry at her role in all this, it was clear my father had manipulated her too. "I'll talk to my lawyer," I said finally. "If you're telling the truth about the money, if you help us recover it, and testify against my father if necessary, I'll see what we can do." Relief flooded her face. "I'll give you everything I have, documents, emails, dates, amounts. Uncle Charles didn't just cross a line with you, Maddie. He dragged me into his mess and could have ruined my life too." As I drove home from the coffee shop, my mind was racing. My father hadn't just stolen my inheritance for Rebecca's education. He'd used half of it to further his own business interests. This changed everything. It wasn't just about protecting his daughter's future. It was also about his own greed. I called Mr. Harmon as soon as I got home and told him about my meeting with Tara. "This is significant," Mr. Harmon said. "If we can prove your father diverted funds for his own business purposes, it strengthens our case considerably. It shows this wasn't just some misguided attempt to help your sister. There was personal financial gain involved. I'll contact Detective Mercer immediately." The next morning, I went into work early, hoping to lose myself in my research for a few hours. Instead, I found an email waiting for me from Mr. Harmon. "Detective Mercer is moving forward with arrest. Your father will be taken into custody today. Be prepared for fallout." I stared at those words for a long time, trying to process what they meant. My father, the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had once built me a treehouse, who had gradually pushed me out of his life in favor of his new family, was going to be arrested today for stealing from me. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction. Another part felt a deep, aching sadness for what our family had become. And somewhere, underneath it all, was a flicker of fear about what would happen next. As it turned out, I didn't have to wait long to find out. Just before noon, my phone rang. It was Rebecca, and she was sobbing. "They took him," she cried. "The police came to the house and arrested Dad. They put him in handcuffs and took him away in front of everyone. Are you happy now?" I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of her pain even through my anger. "Rebecca." "Don't," she cut me off. "Don't say you're sorry or that you had no choice. You did this. You're destroying our family over a stupid cabin and some money." "It wasn't just about Rebecca's tuition," I said quietly. "He took half the money for himself, for a business deal. Did you know that?" Her sobbing abruptly stopped. "What are you talking about?" "Dad only put half the money in your education trust. The other half he invested in some development project he's been trying to get in on. Tara told me yesterday. The police have confirmed it." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I don't believe you," she finally said, but there was uncertainty in her voice. "It's true, Rebecca. This wasn't just about your future. It was about his, too." The phone went dead. I set it down and buried my face in my hands. My father was in jail, my sister was devastated, and the cabin, the place where I'd felt most at home, most connected to my grandfather, was occupied by strangers who had no idea of the drama surrounding their new home. I left work early that day, unable to concentrate. As I drove home, my phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Harmon. "Your father has been formally charged. Arraignment tomorrow morning. Bail will likely be set. We're making progress on tracing the funds. Call me when you can." I pulled over to the side of the road, suddenly needing a moment to breathe. The events of the past week felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unravel. But this was my reality now: criminal charges, family members who despised me, and a legal battle that would inevitably become public, exposing our family's dysfunction for everyone to see. I thought about Grandpa Elliot and what he would say if he could see what was happening. He had left me the cabin because he wanted me to have a place where I belonged, a sanctuary. Instead, his final act of love had set off a chain reaction that was tearing what remained of our family apart. "What would you do, Grandpa?" I whispered to the empty car. But of course, there was no answer. My phone rang again. This time, it was my mother. "I'm flying back tomorrow," she said without preamble. "Charles has been arrested." "I know," I said. "Rebecca called me." "This is getting out of hand, Madeline. There has to be a way to resolve this without destroying everyone's lives." I gripped the steering wheel tightly. "Did you know that Dad only used half the money for Rebecca's tuition? The other half he invested in some land development deal. This wasn't just about helping his daughter, it was about helping himself, too." There was a pause. "Are you sure about that?" "Yes. Tara confessed everything, and the police have confirmed the money transfers. Dad lied to everyone, Mom. He didn't just steal from me. He manipulated Rebecca, Tara, even Diane." My mother sighed heavily. "Oh, Charles," she murmured, and I could hear the mixture of disappointment and resignation in her voice. "I'll be there tomorrow afternoon. We'll figure this out, Madeline. Somehow, we'll figure this out." As I hung up, I noticed a text from Detective Mercer. "We've located most of the funds. Call me to discuss next steps." A small flicker of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, something could be salvaged from this mess after all. The money wouldn't bring back the cabin, wouldn't repair the damage to our family, but it was something, a start. I pulled back onto the road, heading home to prepare for whatever tomorrow would bring. The road ahead would be difficult, painful even, but for the first time since discovering my father's betrayal, I felt a tiny sense of control returning. Justice was in motion, and while it wouldn't heal all wounds, it was necessary. For me, for my grandfather's memory, and perhaps, in some way I couldn't yet see, for our broken family too. The county courthouse was an imposing structure of gray stone and wide steps that seemed designed to make you feel small as you approached. I arrived early for my father's arraignment, dressed in the only suit I owned, the same one I'd worn to Grandpa Elliot's funeral. Mr. Harmon met me at the entrance, his leather briefcase worn but expensive looking, his expression carefully neutral. "Remember," he said quietly as we walked through security, "this is just the arraignment. Your father will enter a plea, bail will be set, and we'll move on to the next phase. Don't expect any dramatic resolutions today." I nodded, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. Despite everything, I had never imagined I would be sitting in a courtroom watching my father being charged with crimes that could send him to prison. The reality of it was finally sinking in, and it felt heavier than I had anticipated. The courtroom was already half full when we entered. I recognized a few faces, my father's business partners, some family friends. They glanced at me with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. I kept my eyes forward and sat where Mr. Harmon indicated, close enough to see but not in the very front row. Detective Mercer nodded to me from where she stood talking with a sharp-dressed woman I assumed was the prosecutor. Just as Mr. Harmon and I settled in, the side door opened, and my mother walked in. She looked tired but composed, her work suit slightly wrinkled from travel. She hesitated when she saw me, then came over and sat down beside me. "I got an earlier flight," she said simply. Before I could respond, the door on the other side of the courtroom opened, and my father was led in by a court officer. He wasn't in handcuffs. Apparently, he had been released on temporary bond the night before. But he looked diminished somehow. His normally impeccable appearance was slightly rumpled, his confident posture replaced by something more guarded. He didn't look around the room, didn't try to spot familiar faces. His attorney, a silver-haired man with an expensive suit and a permanent frown, whispered something to him as they sat down. "All rise," the bailiff called, and everyone stood as the judge entered. The proceedings moved quickly after that. The charges were read: fraud, identity theft, grand larceny, forgery. My father pleaded not guilty to all counts, his voice steady but lacking its usual authority. The prosecutor argued for a high bail, citing the significant amount of money involved. My father's attorney countered that his client was a respected businessman with deep ties to the community, not a flight risk. The judge set bail at $100,000. My father didn't react visibly, but his attorney nodded as if this was expected. Court was adjourned until the preliminary hearing, set for 3 weeks later. As people began to file out, my father finally looked up and scanned the room. His eyes found mine, and for a brief moment, we just stared at each other. I couldn't read his expression. It wasn't quite anger, wasn't quite regret. Perhaps it was simply recognition of how far we had fallen. Then someone stepped between us, breaking the connection, and my father was led away by his attorney. "That went as expected," Mr. Harmon said, gathering his papers. "The bail is reasonable, given the charges." "Will he make it?" I asked, surprised to find myself concerned. "Almost certainly. He has assets, connections." Mr. Harmon glanced at my mother. "Mrs. Mitchell, good to see you again, though I wish it were under better circumstances." My mother nodded distractedly, her eyes on the door my father had just exited. Through. "This is all so unnecessary," she murmured, more to herself than to us. Mom, I said, a warning in my voice. She turned to me, suddenly focused. We need to talk, Madeline. Not here. Let's get lunch. Mr. Harmon excused himself, promising to call me later with updates on the recovered funds. My mother and I walked, silently, to a small cafe across from the courthouse. It wasn't until we were seated with coffee in front of us that she spoke again. I talked to Charles last night, she said. He called me from the police station. I tensed. And? He admitted. Everything. The forgery, using Tara, taking the money, all of it. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. He also told me something else. Something I think you should know. I waited, steeling myself for whatever justification or excuse she was about to relay. Your grandfather's cabin, she said slowly. It wasn't just a random piece of property. To Charles. It was where he grew up, where he spent every summer until he was 18. His father, your grandfather, taught him to fish there, to swim, to build things. In Charles's mind, that cabin should have stayed in the direct family line. When Elliot left it to you instead, it felt like a betrayal. I stared at her in disbelief. So that justifies what he did? Stealing from me was okay because he felt entitled to Grandpa's property? I'm not justifying anything, my mother said firmly. What Charles did was wrong, criminally wrong. I'm just trying to help you understand why this particular property meant so much to him, why he couldn't just let it go. If it meant so much to him, why did he sell it? I demanded. My mother looked away. Because he's not the sentimental type, Madeline. You know that. Once he convinced himself he deserved the property more than you did, it became an asset like any other. Something to be leveraged for what he needed or wanted. I shook my head, disgust rising in me. So he stole my inheritance because he felt entitled to it, then immediately sold it for cash. And I'm supposed to what? Feel sympathy for him? No, my mother said. You're supposed to understand that this is more complicated than just a black and white case of theft. There's history here, pain that goes back decades. The only pain I care about right now is mine, I said coldly. And Rebecca's, I suppose. She's the innocent one in all this. My mother sighed. Have you talked to her since yesterday? No. She made it pretty clear she blames me for everything. She's just a child, Madeline. She doesn't understand what her father did wrong. She just knows her world is falling apart. My mother reached across the table and touched my hand. I'm not asking you to drop the charges. I'm asking you to remember that there are people caught in the crossfire here. I pulled my hand away. I didn't start this fire, Mom. Dad did. I'm just making sure he faces the consequences. Before she could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Detective Mercer. Meeting with prosecutor at 2 p.m. Your presence requested. I showed my mother the message and stood up. I have to go, she nodded, looking suddenly older than her years. I'm staying at the Hampton Inn. Come by later if you want to talk more. As I waited for a rideshare back to the courthouse, I thought about what my mother had said. The cabin had been my grandfather's childhood home too, yet he had chosen to leave it to me, not to my father. There had to be a reason for that choice, one my father had chosen to override through criminal means rather than respect. The meeting with the prosecutor, a no-nonsense woman named Andrea Watkins, was held in a small conference room at the courthouse. Detective Mercer and Mr. Harmon were already there when I arrived. Ms. Mitchell, Ms. Watkins said, shaking my hand firmly. Thank you for coming. We have some developments I wanted to discuss with you in person. I sat down, noticing a folder of documents on the table between us. You found the money? Most of it, Detective Mercer confirmed. As your cousin indicated, approximately $250,000 was transferred to a trust in your sister's name at First National, specifically earmarked for educational expenses. Another $250,000 was invested in East Ridge Development Partners, a limited liability company that's purchasing land near the state park for a potential resort development. Your father is listed as a 10% partner in this venture, Ms. Watkins added. It appears he used the funds from the sale of your property to buy into what he hoped would be a lucrative development opportunity. Mr. Harmon leaned forward. What? About recovering the funds? That's what I wanted to discuss, Ms. Watkins said, opening the folder. We've frozen both the educational trust and the investment funds. The money hasn't been spent yet, which is fortunate. However, returning it to Ms. Mitchell isn't as simple as it might seem. Why not? I asked. Because of the innocent buyers, she explained. The Blackwell family purchased your property in good faith, without knowledge of the fraud. They've already moved in, started renovations, enrolled their children in local schools. Legally, they have certain protections. I felt a sinking feeling. So, what does that mean for me? It means we have options, Mr. Harmon interjected. You can pursue full financial restitution, getting back the entire $500,000 but giving up any claim to the physical property. Or you can try to void the sale and reclaim the property, which would mean a lengthy court battle with the Blackwells, who would then have claims against your father. And given your father's legal troubles, Ms. Watkins added, the second option could leave the Blackwells in a very difficult position, potentially losing both their new home and a significant portion of their investment. I sat back, processing this. The cabin was gone. Even if I fought for it, the battle would hurt innocent people who had done nothing wrong. But the money, at least that could be recovered. I want the money back, I said finally. All of it. I don't want to punish the Blackwells for my father's crimes. Ms. Watkins nodded approvingly. That's a reasonable decision. We'll proceed with the financial restitution approach then. Your father's attorney has already reached out about a possible plea agreement. What kind of agreement? I asked cautiously. Your father would plead guilty to reduced charges, fraud and forgery, dropping the identity theft and grand larceny. He would make full financial restitution, plus pay a substantial fine. In exchange, we would recommend a suspended sentence with probation rather than jail time. I looked at Mr. Harmon. What do you think? From a purely financial perspective, it's a good offer, he said. You would get all your money back plus interest. The criminal record would still impact your father professionally. He'd likely lose his contractor's license, at least temporarily, but he wouldn't go to prison. Thought of Rebecca's tearful phone call, of my father being led away in handcuffs. Was that justice enough? Did I need to see him behind bars to feel vindicated? What about Tara? I asked suddenly. My cousin who was involved. As a first-time offender who has been fully cooperative, she would likely receive probation and community service, Detective Mercer said. Her testimony against your father has been valuable. I took a deep breath. I need some time to think about this. Can I let you know tomorrow? Ms. Watkins nodded. Of course. This is a significant decision. Take the time you need. As I left the courthouse, I felt conflicted in a way I hadn't expected. For weeks, my focus had been singular. Make my father pay for what he had done. Now that justice was within reach, I found myself weighing consequences I hadn't fully considered. Before, I drove aimlessly for a while, eventually finding myself on the road to Lake Meridian. I hadn't been back since discovering the sale, but some instinct pulled me there now, a need to see what I had lost before deciding how to proceed. The cabin looked different already. The Blackwells had painted the exterior a soft blue instead of the weathered gray I remembered. New flower boxes hung from the windows, and children's bicycles were propped against the porch. As I sat in my car across the road, the front door opened and a woman emerged, carrying a toddler on her hip, while an older child ran ahead of her toward a swing set that hadn't been there in Grandpa's time. They looked happy. They had made the cabin their home already, filling it with new life, new memories. My grandfather had always said the cabin had spirit, that it was alive in a way cities weren't. Perhaps this was what he meant. Its ability to shelter generations, to adapt and welcome new people while retaining its essential character. I was about to drive away when my phone rang. It was Rebecca. Maddie? Her voice was small, hesitant. Can we talk? Of course, I said, surprised. What's up? Not on the phone. Can you meet me? I'm at Riverview Park, by the playground. 20 minutes later, I found Rebecca sitting on a bench overlooking the river. She was alone, her phone clutched in her hands, her expression troubled. When she saw me, she didn't smile, but she didn't look angry either. Thanks for coming, she said as I sat down beside her. No problem. What's going on? She stared out at the water for a moment before answering. I talked to Tara. She told me everything, about how Dad used her, about the development deal. She turned to me. Is it true? Did Dad really only use half the money for my tuition? I nodded. That's what the police found. The other half went to some resort development he wanted to invest in. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. He told me he sold the cabin because he believed in me because my music was worth it. But it wasn't just about me at all, was it? It was about him too. I didn't know what to say. I had been so focused on my own sense of betrayal that I hadn't fully considered how Rebecca would feel learning that she had been used as a partial justification for theft. I'm sorry, I said finally. I know how much Juilliard means to you. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I don't even know if I want to go anymore. Not like this. Not with stolen money. She looked at me directly. Is Dad going to jail? I don't know yet, I said honestly. The prosecutor offered a deal. If he pleads guilty and returns all the money, he might get probation instead of prison time. Rebecca nodded slowly. Are you going to take it? The deal? I'm thinking about it. It would mean getting back the money but not the cabin. The new owners get to keep it. I saw them yesterday, Rebecca said quietly. The family that bought it. They have little kids. They seem nice. She hesitated. I think Grandpa would be okay with them having the cabin. He always said houses need children's laughter to keep them alive. I smiled sadly, remembering Grandpa Elliot saying something similar when Rebecca was born, before my father gradually pushed me out of their lives. I was mad at you, Rebecca continued. I thought you were being cruel, trying to punish Dad and me because you were jealous or resentful. But that's not it, is it? He really did steal from you. Yes, I said simply. He did. She was quiet for a long moment. What are you going to do with the money if you get it back? I hadn't thought that far ahead. I don't know. Save it, invest it, maybe buy another place someday, though it won't be the same as Grandpa's cabin. Rebecca took a deep breath. I was thinking maybe I could apply for scholarships. For Juilliard, I mean. There are some specifically for classical piano. My teacher thinks I could qualify. I'm sure you could, I said, genuinely impressed with her change in perspective. You're talented, Rebecca. You don't need Dad's stolen money to make it. She gave me a half smile, the first real one I'd seen from her in years. Thanks. She stood up. I should go. Mom's waiting in the car. I needed to talk to you myself, to understand. As she walked away, she turned back. Maddie? Whatever you decide about the plea deal, I get it now. I really do. I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of sadness and hope. My father had betrayed both of us in different ways. But perhaps something good could come from this after all. Not just justice for me, but a chance for Rebecca to see her father clearly for the first time. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Have you decided about the plea deal? I looked. Out at the river, thinking about the Blackwell family in their blue cabin, about Rebecca applying for scholarships, about my father facing the consequences of his actions without destroying what remained of his life. I thought about Grandpa Elliot and what he would want. Justice, yes, but also healing if possible. Yes, I texted back. I'm taking the deal. The river flowed on, constant and unchanging despite everything. Like Grandpa always said, water finds its way, no matter what obstacles stand in its path. Perhaps that was true for people too. We find our way forward, even through betrayal and loss, even when the path looks nothing like what we expected. The cabin was gone, but maybe, just maybe, I could build something new with what remained. 6. Months later, I stood at the edge of a different lake, watching autumn leaves dance across the surface of the water. Mist rose from the shore in the early morning light, transforming the landscape into something ethereal and new. This wasn't Lake Meridian. This place had no history for me, no childhood memories embedded in its soil or shoreline. But it had potential. "What do you think?" asked Elise, the real estate agent who had been helping me for the past month. "It's not lakefront property like you initially wanted, but it has private lake access just down that path. And the land itself is beautiful. 5 acres, mostly wooded," I nodded, taking in the clearing where we stood. It would be a perfect spot for a small cabin, with large windows facing east to catch the sunrise over the lake. "I like it," I said simply. She smiled. "I thought you might. It's within your budget, even with enough left over to build something modest. And it's only 40 minutes from your work, which is better than the other properties we've seen." My budget. The word still felt strange to me. 4 months ago, as part of the plea agreement, my father had returned the entire $500,000 from the sale of Grandpa's cabin, plus an additional $75,000 in interest and penalties. The money had been sitting in my account since then, untouched, as I tried to decide what to do with it. For a while, I had considered just investing it all, putting it away for retirement or some distant future need. But as the weeks passed, I realized that approach felt too much like running away from the past. The money was more than just money. It represented Grandpa Elliot's final gift to me, his attempt to provide me with a place of my own. Using it to build something new felt right, a way to honor his intentions even if the original cabin was no longer an option. "I'll take it," I told Elise. As we walked back to our cars to begin the paperwork process, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Maddie," she said when I answered, "I just wanted to remind you about dinner tonight. 7 o'clock at my place." "I remember," I assured her. "I'll be there." "Rebecca's looking forward to seeing you," she added. "She got another letter from Juilliard yesterday." I smiled. "I can't wait to hear about it. See you at 7. My relationship with my mother had improved considerably in recent months. After everything happened with my father, she had taken a hard look at her own role in our family dynamics, how her frequent absences had left me vulnerable to my father's gradual exclusion, how she had enabled his favoritism by not confronting it directly. She had requested a position that required less travel, and had made a genuine effort to rebuild our connection. As for my father, things were more complicated. He had accepted the plea deal, returning all the money and pleading guilty to reduced charges. Instead of prison, he had received 5 years of probation, substantial community service hours, and a temporary suspension of his contractor's license. The development deal he had tried to buy into with my stolen inheritance had collapsed when his legal troubles became public, leaving him with significant financial losses beyond just the restitution he owed me. We hadn't spoken directly since, the day in court when he formally entered his guilty plea. I had seen him only once since then, from a distance at a family funeral. He had looked older, diminished somehow. According to my mother, he was working as a foreman for a former competitor, while he waited for his license suspension to end. A significant step down for a man who had once owned his own successful company. I didn't know if I would ever forgive him completely. The betrayal had cut too deep, had revealed too much about how little he valued me compared to his own desires and Rebecca's future. But the anger that had once consumed me had gradually faded into something more like sadness. Sadness for what might have been, for the father-daughter relationship we had never truly had. Rebecca, surprisingly, had become a more consistent presence in my life. After our conversation in the park, something had shifted between us. When she discovered the full extent of our father's deception, she had been forced to reconsider everything she thought she knew about her place in the family. Learning that she had been used as partial justification for theft had shaken her sense of identity in ways I understood all too well. True to her word, she had applied for scholarships to fund her music education. She had received partial funding, but not enough for the full Juilliard experience. Rather than give up, she had adjusted her plans, enrolling in the state university's well-regarded music program for her first 2 years, with the intention of transferring to Juilliard later with additional scholarships and possibly my help. Her resilience impressed me. That evening, I arrived at my mother's new condo with a bottle of wine and plans for the land I'd just purchased. Rebecca was already there, playing something complex and beautiful on my mother's upright piano. She stopped when she saw me and came over for a hug. Another new development in our relationship that still felt slightly awkward but genuine. "I got the Markowski scholarship," she announced without preamble. "It's $10,000 a year for 2 years. If I keep my GPA up, they'll renew it for my junior and senior years too." "That's fantastic," I said, genuinely pleased for her. "You earned it," she beamed, a flash of the old Rebecca showing through, the confident, sometimes entitled girl who expected good things to happen. But there was something different now, a self-awareness that tempered her natural confidence. I worked really hard on the audition pieces. My professor said my Bach interpretation was the best he'd heard from a freshman. My mother emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Rebecca has been practicing 6 hours a day," she said with a mix of pride and exasperation. "The neighbors must think I'm running a conservatory." As we sat down to dinner, the conversation flowed easily. Rebecca's music, my work with the wildlife agency, my mother's new position. It wasn't until dessert that I shared my news. "I bought some land today," I said, pulling up photos on my phone. 5 acres near Pinewood Lake. I'm going to build a cabin." My mother looked at the images, her expression thoughtful. "It's beautiful, Maddie. Different from your grandfather's place, but beautiful in its own way." "That's what I thought," I agreed. "I'm meeting with an architect next week to discuss plans. Nothing elaborate. 2 bedrooms, a large main room with a fireplace, a wraparound porch. Something simple but solid." Rebecca studied the photos with interest. "Are you going to build it yourself?" I shook my head. "I'll hire contractors for most of it. But there are some things I want to do myself. Grandpa taught me enough basic carpentry that I can handle the porch railings and some of the interior finish work." "Your grandfather would be proud," my mother said softly. "Not just of the cabin, but of how you've handled everything." I wasn't so sure about that. There had been moments of rage, of vindictiveness, of wanting to see my father suffer more than he had. But I had also found my way to something that felt, if not like forgiveness, at least like acceptance. I had reclaimed what I could and was building something new with what remained. "Thanks, Mom," I said. "I hope so." After dinner, as I was helping clear the table, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Tara, my cousin. "Got the job with Sierra Construction, starting Monday. Thanks for the reference, Maddie. I owe you." I smiled slightly. Tara had paid a price for her role in my father's scheme. Community service, probation, a permanent mark on her record. But she had been genuinely remorseful, cooperating fully with the investigation and cutting ties with my father afterward. When she'd asked for my help finding a job with a construction company that didn't know my father, I'd decided to give her a chance. Everyone deserved an opportunity to rebuild. Later that evening, as I drove home, I took a detour past the road leading to Grandpa's old cabin. I didn't turn down it. I hadn't been back since that day I'd seen the Blackwell family settled in. But just passing by gave me a strange sense of closure. The cabin would always be part of my past, a place where I had found acceptance and love, when they were in short supply elsewhere. But it was no longer my future. My future was 5 acres of possibility beside a different lake. A blank canvas where I could create new memories, new traditions. Perhaps someday I would bring my own children there, teach them to fish and identify constellations, tell them stories about their great-grandfather Elliot and the lessons he had taught me. The money that was meant to provide me with a home would still do exactly that, just not in the way Grandpa had anticipated. The property was different, the timing was different, but the purpose remained the same. A place of my own, a sanctuary from the world, a space where I belonged. As I turned onto the highway leading home, my phone rang through the car's speaker. System. The screen showed a number I didn't recognize. Hello? I answered, curious. Madeline, it's Charles. My father's voice, hesitant and unfamiliar without its usual confidence. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Dad, how did you get this number? Your mother, he admitted. I wouldn't have called, but I heard you purchased some land, that you're planning to build a cabin. I said nothing, waiting. I know you have no reason to trust me or want anything to do with me, he continued, his voice rougher than I remembered. But construction is what I know. If you'd consider it, I'd like to help. Free of charge, of course, just labor whenever you need it. The offer hung in the air between us, unexpected and complicated. Was this a genuine attempt at amends, or just another manipulation? Did it matter? I'll think about it, I said finally. That's all I can promise right now. That's more than I deserve, he replied quietly. Thank you, Madeline. After we hung up, I drove in silence, processing the conversation. I didn't know if I would take him up on his offer. I didn't know if we could ever rebuild what had been broken between us, or if it was even worth trying. Some betrayals cut too deep for simple solutions. But as I watched the sun setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange, and purple that reminded me of evenings on Grandpa's porch, I realized that the future wasn't set in stone. Like the cabin I was planning to build, it would take shape one decision at a time, one moment of choice after another. For now, that was enough. The knowledge that I had survived, that I had recovered what mattered most, and that I was moving forward, building something new from the ashes of what had been lost. 18 months later, I stood on the porch of my newly completed cabin, watching the morning fog lift off Pinewood Lake. The scent of fresh-cut pine still lingered in the air, mixing with the earthy smell of the surrounding forest. Birds called to each other from the trees, and somewhere in the distance, a fish jumped, creating ripples across the glassy surface of the water. The cabin had turned out better than I'd imagined. Not as large as Grandpa Elliot's place, but with its own character. Stone fireplace, exposed timber beams, wide windows to let in natural light. The wraparound porch had been my non-negotiable feature, a place to sit and watch the seasons change, to feel connected to the world outside. Coffee's ready, called a voice from inside. I turned to see Jake emerging through the screen door, 2 steaming mugs in his hands. His dark hair was tousled, and he wore one of my flannel shirts over his pajama pants. Perfect timing, I said, accepting a mug and leaning over to kiss him. I was just thinking this morning couldn't get any better. He smiled, settling into one of the Adirondack chairs I'd built myself. Liar, you were brooding again. I laughed. Jake had an uncanny ability to read my moods, even after just 8 months together. We'd met at a conservation fundraiser where he was photographing wildlife artwork for the organization's website. Something had clicked between us immediately. His straightforward manner, his quiet confidence, the way he saw the world through his camera lens, always finding beauty in unexpected places. Not brooding, I corrected. Reflecting. There's a difference. He sipped his coffee, unconvinced. Reflecting on what? I gazed out at the lake. On how much has changed since Grandpa died. On how things have a way of coming full circle. Jake nodded, understanding. He knew the whole story, about Grandpa's cabin, my father's betrayal, the legal battle, and the aftermath. I had told him everything on our third date, wanting to be honest about the family complications he might be getting into. Instead of being scared off, he had listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, and later told me he admired how I had handled it all. Speaking of full circle, he said, "What time are they arriving today?" My stomach tightened slightly. Around noon. Mom's bringing Rebecca and the food. Dad's coming separately. Today would be the first time my father had seen the completed cabin. He had taken me up on my tentative acceptance of his offer to help. With construction, but only in limited ways. He had consulted on the plans, connected me with reliable subcontractors, and spent 3 weekends helping frame the structure. Our interactions had been cautious, focused on the work, with little personal conversation. This would be different. A family gathering, a housewarming. Of sorts. "Are you nervous?" Jake asked. I considered the question. Not nervous exactly, just aware of all the undercurrents. He reached over and squeezed my hand. "It's going to be fine. You've all come a long way." We had, though the journey had been anything but straightforward. My father's contrition had proven genuine, if imperfect. The loss of his business and professional standing had humbled him in ways nothing else could have. Working as a foreman for another company, having to rebuild his reputation from scratch, had forced him to confront the consequences of his actions daily. Rebecca had flourished at the State University's music program, her talent blossoming under the pressure to prove herself worthy of the scholarships she'd earned. She had matured remarkably, the entitled teenager gradually replaced by a young woman with purpose and perspective. My mother had kept her promise to be more present, calling regularly and making time for monthly visits. She had become something of a mediator between my father and me, neither pushing for reconciliation nor discouraging it, but creating space for possibility. As for me, I had found unexpected fulfillment in building this new place. Each nail I drove, each board I placed, felt like an act of reclamation, not of what I had lost, but of who I was and who I wanted to become. "I should get dressed before everyone arrives," I said, finishing my coffee. "And we should probably bring in more firewood. It's supposed to get chilly tonight." Jake nodded. "I'll help. But first..." He pulled out his camera, which was never far from reach. "The light on the lake is perfect right now." I watched as he moved to the edge of the porch, framing shots of the misty water and surrounding hills. Jake had an eye for moments of transition. Dawn breaking, seasons changing, the instant between stillness and movement. His photographs captured fleeting beauty that most people missed entirely. An hour later, we had brought in extra firewood, tidied the cabin, and prepared for our guests. Jake was arranging wildflowers in a mason jar when we heard the first car coming up the gravel drive. My mother arrived with Rebecca, bearing casserole dishes and a homemade pie. Rebecca immediately started exploring the cabin, exclaiming over details and testing the acoustics of each room by humming different notes. "This place is amazing, Maddie," my mother said, hugging me tightly. "It has your grandfather's spirit, but it's uniquely yours too." "Thanks, Mom," I said, helping her unpack the food. "I think he would have liked it. He would have loved it," she corrected. "And he would be so proud of you." Rebecca emerged from examining the guest bedroom. "The view from that room is incredible," she said. "I call dibs for holiday visits." I smiled at her enthusiasm. "Noted, though you might have to compete with Mom for it." "I brought my portable keyboard," Rebecca added. I thought maybe I could play after dinner. I've been working on a piece that seems perfect for this place. I'd like that, I said, genuinely touched by the offer. We were arranging dishes on the dining table I'd built from reclaimed barnwood when another car pulled up outside. Through the window, I saw my father emerge, hesitating briefly before approaching the cabin. He carried a large wrapped package under one arm. I opened the door before he could knock, and for a moment we just looked at each other. He seemed smaller. Somehow, his once commanding presence diminished by time and circumstance. The confident businessman had been replaced by someone more weathered, more human. "Madeline," he said, with a nod that was almost formal. "The place looks wonderful from the outside." "Come in," I replied, stepping aside. "See the rest of it." He entered cautiously, as if unsure of his welcome despite the invitation. His eyes moved around the main room, taking in the stonework of the fireplace, the woodwork of the staircase, the exposed beams overhead. "You did good, daughter," he said softly. "Really good." Something in his voice, a note of genuine admiration mixed with regret, caught me off guard. Before I could respond, Jake approached, extending his hand. "You must be Madeline's father," he said. "I'm Jake. It's nice to finally meet you." My father shook his hand, seeming grateful for the social protocol to fall back on. "Charles Mitchell. The pleasure is mine." As they exchanged pleasantries, I noticed the package he had set down by the door. "What's that?" I asked, nodding toward it. "Ah." He looked slightly embarrassed. "It's a housewarming gift. Nothing fancy, just, well, maybe. You should open it." I picked up the package, surprised by its weight, and carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a hand-carved wooden sign. The letters burned into the wood with careful precision. "Mitchell's Retreat, Eastern 2025. "I thought it might look good by the entrance," my father said, watching my reaction. "If you don't like it, it's..." "Perfect," I interrupted, running my fingers over the carefully crafted lettering. "Did you make this?" He nodded. "Wood carving. It's something I've been working on recently. Helps fill the evenings." The sign was beautiful, clearly the result of hours of painstaking work. I tried to imagine my father, who had once been too important and busy for such things, sitting alone in the evenings, carefully burning each letter into the wood, and felt something shift inside me. "Thank you," I said, meeting his eyes. "I know exactly where it should go." Dinner was less awkward than I had feared. Rebecca filled the silence with stories from school, while Jake asked thoughtful questions that kept conversation flowing. My mother watched everyone with quiet satisfaction, occasionally catching my eye with small, encouraging smiles. After the meal, Rebecca set up her keyboard near the fireplace and began to play. The piece started softly, almost hesitantly, before building into something more complex and emotionally resonant. The notes seemed to fill the cabin, bringing warmth to spaces that had yet to accumulate their own memories and history. "She composed this herself," my mother whispered to me. "She's been working on it for months." I watched my sister, her face serene in concentration, her fingers moving confidently across the keys, and felt a surge of pride. Despite everything, despite the twisted path that had led us here, she had found her way to something authentic and true. When she finished, we all applauded, Rebecca beaming at the reception. "That was beautiful," Jake said. "What's it called?" Rebecca glanced at me. "I call it inheritance, because some things are passed down that aren't material, like music, like talent." She paused, like the ability to start over. I felt the weight of her words, the subtle acknowledgement of our shared journey. Before I could respond, my father cleared his throat. "I should probably head back," he said, rising from his chair. "It's a long drive, and these old eyes don't do well on dark roads anymore." I walked him to the door, aware of the eyes of the others on us. Outside on the porch, The evening had turned cool, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Thanks for coming," I said, feeling the inadequacy of the words. My father nodded, hands in his pockets, looking out at the lake rather than at me. "Thank you for inviting me, for letting me be part of this, even in a small way." We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken words between us. "You know," he finally said, "your grandfather and I, we had a complicated relationship. He was a hard man to please, and I never quite measured up to what he wanted. When he left the cabin to you instead of me, it felt like one final rejection." He shook his head. "That doesn't excuse what I did. Nothing could. But I want you to know that it wasn't just about the money or about favoring Rebecca. It was about old wounds I never dealt with properly." I hadn't expected this confession, this glimpse into the pain that had driven his actions. It didn't erase the betrayal, but it added a dimension I hadn't fully considered before. "I understand more than you might think," I said carefully. "About not measuring up in a father's eyes." He flinched slightly, accepting the pointed comparison. "I deserved that, and worse." He turned to face me directly. "I'm sorry, Madeline. Not just for taking the cabin, but for all the years before that. For pushing you away because you reminded me of my own failures. For not seeing what was right in front of me. A daughter any father would be proud of." The words hung in the cool evening air between us. Part of me wanted to dismiss them as too little, too late. Another part recognized the courage it had taken to speak them aloud. "I don't know if I can forgive everything," I said honestly, "but I'm willing to try moving forward from here. One step at a time." He nodded, accepting the limitations of my response. "That's more than I have any right to expect." He glanced back at the cabin, light spilling from its windows onto the porch. "You've built something good here, Madeline. Something that will last." As he turned to leave, I found myself calling after him. "Dad?" He paused, looking back. "Thanksgiving," I said. "We're having it here this year, if you want to come." A small, cautious smile crossed his face. "I'd like that. Thank you." After he drove away, I remained on the porch, watching the moonlight on the water. Jake joined me after a while, slipping his arm around my waist. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think I am." Inside, I could hear my mother and Rebecca talking, their voices punctuated by occasional laughter. The cabin felt alive with their presence, the empty spaces gradually filling with new memories, new connections. "It's strange," I said to Jake. "When Grandpa left me his cabin, I thought he was giving me a piece of the past, something to hold onto. But maybe what he was really giving me was a future, a foundation to build on, not just a structure to preserve." He leaned his head against my shoulder. "Maybe that's the best kind of inheritance." Later that night, after everyone had gone, Jake and I sat by the fire, the crackling logs providing the only light in the room. I thought about all the paths that had led to this moment, the loss, the betrayal, the legal battles, but also the healing, the growth, the unexpected connections formed along the way. The cabin my grandfather had left me was gone, owned by another family creating their own memories within its walls. But something of his spirit, his intention, lived on in this new place. Not a replacement for what was lost, but a continuation of what mattered most. Outside, an owl called from the darkness, its voice echoing across the water. Inside, the fire warmed the heart of the home I had built with my own hands, with help from unexpected sources, with materials both old and new. Some inheritances, I realized, aren't properties or possessions, but the values that shape us, the resilience that carries us through hardship, the capacity to begin again when what we thought was certain has been taken away. Grandpa Elliot had given me that kind of inheritance too. One that couldn't be stolen or sold, one that had only grown stronger through adversity. As the fire burned down to embers, I took Jake's hand and led him upstairs to our bedroom with its view of the lake and surrounding forest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to decide what kind of woman I wanted to be. For tonight, it was enough to be here, in this place of my own creation, finally at peace with the journey that had brought me home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.